Invite God into your situation, and this will happen. The load is heavy, the burden is a lot, the weight is too much for you to bear, you're almost collapsing, I know. I know that you are currently going through a lot. I know that you feel frustrated, angry, annoyed, tired, stressed, and every other negative emotion you can think of. But hey, what if you're so tired because you have been carrying the burden on your own? What if you are tired because you have been trying to figure things out all on your own? What if you're burnt out because you think you're alone and there's nobody to help? That's simply you taking on a burden that isn't yours alone to bear. Why not let God carry your burden for you? Why not intentionally invite Him into your situation? You think you are very strong, but your strength has failed you. You have now come to the end of yourself. Invite God and let Him take the wheel. Stop struggling to stay in control of the wheel when you don't even know where you are going. Why not give it up and invite Him? Chapter 1. God cares for you. No matter where we live or who we are, God sees us and He knows every detail of our pain. He comprehends the unexplainable anguish that invades our lives like an intruder bent on stealing valuables, our self-esteem, purity, health, hope, future, and more. In Genesis, we read about another woman in distress, facing hopelessness and unknowns. Sarah's slave Hagar, who ran away to the desert when she was mistreated by her mistress. The angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar as she was alone and despairing in the wilderness and assured her that it was safe to return. As a servant, Hagar was considered unimportant and was sometimes treated poorly. But God valued her enough to communicate with her directly. He saw Hagar's pain, and He promised to give her a son and multiply her descendants so they would be too many to count. Pain comes in various forms: physical pain as we fight cancer, emotional pain as we experience a severed relationship, financial pain when our position is terminated and bills stack up, spiritual pain when we question God's love because life is so hard. Pain saps our energy and often leads to bitterness and despair. Like a wicked taskmaster, it can enslave us. But God sees us and He cares deeply. He doesn't waste the pain in our lives. As my daughter Christy likes to say, God never wastes our pain when it's offered to Him. Perhaps our pain will draw us close to Him, keep us from harm, or enable us to encourage others who are suffering. We may not know God's plan for our pain until heaven, but we can be assured, as Hagar was, He sees us and loves us. Psalm 139 encourages us that God sees us in every moment of our lives, and our key verse reminds us that God knows our hearts and our anxious thoughts. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Psalm 139, verse 23. From the time He formed us in our mother's womb until we see Him face to face, we are never out of His sight. There is no place to flee from His presence. God sees us in the dark because it is as bright as the day to Him. He sees us when we wander. He sees every thought, word, and action. He knows our motives and our deepest desires. He is all around us, in front of us, and behind us, and His hand is on us. He leads us. He holds us. He searches us, and He knows us. No matter what your pain is, God sees you too. You may feel as if you are invisible, that no one really sees you or comprehends your hurt and despair. When you begin to doubt that God sees you, turn again to Psalm 139. Our God sees us, knows everything about us, and loves us perfectly. Chapter 2. Let Jesus take the wheel. The Jesus Take the Wheel meaning originated with a song written by Brett James, Hillary Lindsey, and Gordy Sampson, recorded by Carrie Underwood. The ballad tells of a mother deep in thought about her difficult year while driving too fast on a snowy Christmas Eve when the car spins out on black ice. Unable to control the car, she throws her hands in the air and cries out for Jesus to take the wheel and help her and her baby in the back seat. When the car finally rests on the side of the road, she ultimately realizes she needs to restore her faith and let Jesus take control of all her life. The song "Jesus Take the Wheel" resonated with many people who have tried to live their life on their own terms, often with devastating results. Maybe they had never given their heart to Jesus, or at one time knew the comfort of surrendering to Jesus, then snatched back control to navigate life themselves. Traveling through life on our own terms will always end in a crash, either emotionally, physically, or mentally, but always spiritually. It's not too late to let God into that situation. It's not. There is nothing that is past God being able to help. Nothing has gone too far. When Lazarus was dead and in his tomb, Jesus came on the scene and said, "Take away the stone," John 11:39. He was declaring, "I am no through here yet." Then he raised Lazarus from the dead. Often when we face challenges, we roll the stone of hopelessness and despair in front of the situation and give up all hope that it can change. But Jesus is saying to us, move that stone out the way. I can still do something. God can still turn it around if only you let Him. Even when doctors have given up all hope and say there is nothing that they can do, Jesus still can. He can do what is needed. He can do what is necessary. When we put our faith in Him, He can turn it around. The world is full of desperate people whose circumstances are not changing. But the Bible tells us that faith is the victory that overcomes the world, and all things are possible to him who believes. Faith is the key to bringing change to desperate circumstances, allowing God's power to move in those circumstances. Mark chapter 9:23, Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Can you pray with me quickly? Dear Lord, I'm tired. I'm tired of carrying this heavy load all by myself. I acknowledge that I trust you, that I trust your sovereignty. I trust that you have my best interest at heart. I trust that you can turn my situation around, and so I release it all into your hands. Please help me. Now, let's take a look at some interesting stories in the Bible. Chapter 3. Stories of men and women who invited God into their situation. The woman with the issue of blood. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the woman who suffered for 12 years from a certain kind of bleeding. It is often translated as hemorrhaging. She had visited many doctors and healers, and none of them had been able to heal her. It seems frenetic and like she is acting out in a last-ditch effort. Her very presence in a large crowd would be frowned upon in this society because she is considered unclean. Her normal existence would often have been spent watching people skirt around her to avoid the possibility of contact. No brushing or touching, or sharing friendly gestures on the path. She lived in isolation and would have been known for her uncleanliness. According to the law, anything or anyone she touched became unclean as well. The fact that she was in the crowd pressing around Jesus means that each person who bumped into her would have become unclean too, including Jesus. But after 12 years of suffering, she was obviously desperate for a miracle. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. As soon as the woman touches Jesus, her bleeding stops and she knows she's been healed. In an instant, Jesus does what no doctor in 12 years had been able to. Jesus immediately responds to the woman who touched his clothing and was healed. People were pushing and pressing into him from all over, yet he stops, turns, and asks, "Who touched my clothes?" Mark 5:30. The disciples were incredulous, but Jesus knew that healing power had gone out of him. We can't steal a miracle from God. After the woman comes forward and explains herself, Jesus clears up any misconceptions about her healing, saying, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Mark 5:34. God is moved to action by our faith, even when He's in the middle of doing something else. Jesus could have healed the woman and kept on walking to His original destination. Only He and the woman would have known what had taken place. But He didn't do that. Jesus stopped what He was doing and acknowledged the result of this woman's faith, her complete and instantaneous healing. Let's also look at the story of the blind Bartimaeus in Mark chapter 10. The story of blind Bartimaeus is a testimony of one man's determination to be healed. He refused to be silenced when others tried to shush him as he cried out to Jesus. As Jesus walked through Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, heard that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. Knowing he would not be able to make it through the press of people that surrounded Jesus, blind Bartimaeus called out to Jesus. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Even before Bartimaeus had personal contact with Jesus, he believed him to be the Messiah. Son of David is the term Matthew used in his gospel to prove to the Jews that Jesus was the promised Messiah. This title is a reference to the messianic promise in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 to 7. The Messiah would be a descendant of David whose kingdom would last forever. The Pharisees were questioning Jesus' authority and had aligned him with Beelzebub. Yet here was blind Bartimaeus bellowing out the truth for anyone who would listen. Though people tried to get him to be quiet, Bartimaeus was completely focused on Jesus. His cries got the attention of Christ, who asked for him to be brought. When Bartimaeus realized that Jesus had stopped to talk to him, he threw off his cloak and went to Jesus. He told Jesus his greatest desire he wanted to see. Jesus spoke the word, and blind Bartimaeus received his sight. His faith, Jesus said, had made him whole. Jesus didn't have to touch Bartimaeus for him to receive his sight. Dear believer, allow God help you. Do not suffer for the same things that you have your Father available to solve. If Jesus could take away the shame and reproach of the woman with the issue of blood, he can take yours away too. If he could heal the blind man, he can heal you too. But are you inviting him? Chapter 4. What happens when you invite God into your situation? 1. He makes the impossible possible. Consider the Old Testament example of Abraham and Sarah. They were physically dead as far as their ability to bear children was concerned. Yet when God's word came to them, faith was imparted, and their aged bodies were supernaturally empowered to bear children. Or think back to Joseph, who, through dreams and visions, received a great vision for his own personal life. For all practical purposes, it probably seemed as though his dream had died on the day his brothers sold him into slavery. But God took that shattered dream and supernaturally made it come to life years later. Once again, God proved that He is the God who quickens the dead and calls those things that are not as though they are. Naturally speaking, these people have problems that seem impossible and beyond repair. But with God, all things are possible. He knows how to take broken dreams and resurrect them. He knows how to take dashed hopes, withered vision, and dried up callings and restore them to life again. We serve an awesome God who specializes in taking humanly impossible situations and turning them around for His glory. So don't despair just because your situation looks impossible. These matters are not beyond the reach of God, and all He asks is for you to have faith. Hebrews 11:6 tells us, "But without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." God wants to bring new life to those areas that you thought were beyond repair. He desires to quicken your dreams, hopes, and aspirations and restore you to wholeness in every area: your mind, your body, your finances, your marriage, your relationships, etc. 2. He calms every raging storm. Some of us are trapped by difficult circumstances from which there seems little hope or escape. These prisons might have been constructed by other people's evil persecution or by matters over which we don't have any control. We don't have to be at fault to become hopeless captives. The psalmist says that sometimes life can be like a desert, the dryness and barrenness of it all. Sometimes it's like being in prison, you're caught up in the chains of your own making. The unexpected phone calls, health diagnosis, or broken relationships can cause our hearts to churn with turmoil and our minds to race with anxiety. Are you stuck in the middle of a mess and need help calming the storms of life? Are you looking for God in the middle of your storm and wondering if He is able to bring you through to the other side? Storms. Either we have been in one, we're currently going through one, or we're going to be in one soon. We are human, and as humans, we live in a world of pain that leaves us battered, bruised, and scarred. Are your storms caused by something you did or someone did to you? Are they simply a result of living in a broken and sinful world? Regardless of how the storm came about, the waves of pain come crashing in, and life takes to the high seas in the form of seemingly insurmountable grief, deep anxiety, and unresolved conflict. But do you realize that God is the stiller of storms, that when He steps into the boat of your life, every storm will cease? In case you have forgotten, I am here to remind you that He has done it before, and He can do it again. 3. He gives new beginnings. So what if you made irreparable mistakes? What if you have embarked on dangerous journeys in your pursuit of finding the way? Whilst I'm not trying to excuse the act, God is the God of new beginnings. He gives us new mercies every day. God replaces sorrow with joy and disgrace with grace. He transforms death into life and old into new. He places the lonely in families and provides for the desperate. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 19. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. God is a God of new beginnings. He's done this in human lives since Adam and Eve, and He does so every day of every year in countless lives around the world. Think about these words from the book of Romans. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This verse doesn't mean all things are good. It means that despite what happens, God can work good out of any situation for those who love Him. I have named this verse the God of the busted play. If you've watched football, you've undoubtedly seen a play that seemingly wasn't going anywhere, but in the end, it resulted in a touchdown. God does this kind of thing all the time in our lives. I'm sure you can recall instances when something bad happened, but then God worked it for good. There is no situation in which God can't work new beginnings. If God is speaking to you about new beginnings, rest assured He hasn't made a mistake. He knows you. Everything about you. Trust your Creator. You are His handiwork. 4. From shame to glory. The feeling of shame is a result of our becoming conscious of wrong or foolish behavior for which we were not able to foresee its harmful outcome. Trying to hide, we start looking for things that could make us forget our shameful actions. We search for pleasure in things that will never take away this shame. Never. On the contrary, the gratifying moment of the flesh would make us forget our shame, but just for a while. After, shame finds us again, sitting in our solitary place. Conscience would tell us we are not worthy of forgiveness. We may believe we deserve everything else, but not love. Then, our perception changes when we discover the truth about us. We begin to understand that it is even now in our shame we deserve love and forgiveness, because what all our hearts long for is a place to rest and lay down our shame. But there is a God, one who turns mourning to dancing, who gives beauty for ashes, and who turns graves into gardens. And He is ready to turn your shame into glory. He is the only one who can. When we give Him our weaknesses, He uses it for His glory. When we give Him our failures and flaws, He turns them into strength by His grace. Dear believer, it's time to invite Jesus into that situation. No matter what it is, watch Him turn it around for good. Please take a few minutes and pray.